Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Today, we're diving straight into the deep end of the 1960s counterculture blender. Over the past few days of our 30-day countdown into the world's darkest hypnosis cases, we've unmasked the clean-shaven corporate speak of NXIVM, and we've looked at the sun-drenched, Speedo-clad visual fixation of the Buddhafield cult. Today, we're stripping away the high-ticket workshop veneers and the beautiful Hawaiian vistas to look at the absolute blueprint of street-level psychological demolition. We're going out into the scorched earth of the California desert in the late 1960s to deconstruct a man whose name became synonymous with pure American nightmare, Charles Manson. Now, when the general public looks at the Manson family murders and they see a chaotic explosion of counterculture madness, heavy drug use, and a terrifying, almost mystical boogeyman, society loves to look at Manson and think he possessed some sort of supernatural hypnotic evil eye. But let's look at the past sensationalized true crime documentaries and be completely real as professionals. Charles Manson didn't have magic powers. What he had was a PhD in institutional survival. He honed by spending half his life in federal reformatories and prisons where he meticulously studied pimps, grifters, and early self-help literature like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Manson didn't use a stage show pendulum. Instead, he took classic clinical hypnotic protocols, fractionation, identity stripping, and hyper-repetitive acoustic pacing, and he blended them with industrial-grade LSD to turn a group of middle-class, highly educated young people into automated executioners. Today, we decode the clinical mechanics of the family's sermons and trace how an unzipped subconscious mind can be systematically steered into the dark. When Charles Manson was paroled in 1967, he walked straight into the San Francisco Summer of Love. He didn't find political activists. He found a sea of deeply vulnerable, transient, middle-class youth who had severed ties with their families and were desperately searching for a new map of reality. Manson established hyper-attuned rapport by acting as the ultimate mirror for their anti-establishment anxieties. He gathered his family and isolated them at Span Ranch, a desolated rundown movie set in the hills of Los Angeles. Once he had total environmental control, the real hypnotic conditioning began. Manson's primary vehicle for psychological restructuring was the nightly sermon. These weren't standard lectures. These were highly structured, multi-hour sensory overloads. Manson would sit around a campfire with his followers, strumming an acoustic guitar, singing repetitive, droning melodies and locking eyes with individual members. But the music was just the pacing mechanism. The real leverage was the chemical destabilization. Manson would carefully dose his followers with high-potency LSD while keeping his own intake minimal or completely substituting his dose. In clinical terms, LSD functions as a massive disruptor of the brain's default mode network, the neural framework responsible for your ego, your boundaries, and your sense of self. It flings the doors of the critical faculty wide open, and right when the subconscious mind was completely dissolved by the drug, Manson would strike with a highly toxic 3-step protocol. Step 1, baseline rapport pacing. Target isolated counterculture youth by mirroring their anti-suburbia anxieties and validating their desire for total social escape. Step 2, fractionated identity stripping. Use repetitive, drug-fueled ego death drills to force them to symbolically die and abandon their past values over and over. Step 3, the helter-skelter override. fill the newly empty subconscious canvas with a manufactured cosmic emergency, presenting homicidal compliance as the ultimate path to survival. During these intense fractionated acid trips, Manson would command his followers to look in a mirror and literally watch their old identities disappear. He would force them to act out their own deaths, telling them over and over, you have to die to your parents, you have to die to your old ego. When they wept or panicked, he would guide them right back down into a state of deep somatic relaxation, anchoring his voice as the only safe harbour in their psychological storm. Once their past identities were entirely scrubbed, he introduced his chaotic cosmology, an impending apocalyptic race war he termed helter-skelter. He convinced their subconscious minds that the only way to survive this inevitable global purge was to descend into the ultimate dark baseline, to commit acts of horrific, random violence to kickstart the timeline. Let's look at the absolute sarcastic absurdity of what this community accepted. You had brilliant, educated young women, daughters of doctors, lawyers, and successful executives who completely convinced themselves that the ultimate cosmic prophet, the literal reincarnation of Jesus Christ and God combined, was a 5'2" failed musician who couldn't get a record deal, lived in an old-school bus on a garbage-strewn horse ranch, and spent his days screeching about global war because of a hidden track on a Beatles vinyl. It is the absolute peak of tragic counterculture brain rot if a guy who looks like a wet, angry raccoon walks up to you on the street today and tells you that the White Album contains secret blueprints for an underground desert bunker. You don't say, yep, tell me more about my ego, cosmic father. You pepper spray him and buy a lock for your door. But under the fractionated high of Manson's campfire loops, his followers didn't just listen, they systematically executed 7 innocent people in August 1969, fully believing they were fulfilling a divine acoustic guitar script. As a clinical hypnotherapist in strategic psychotherapy, we have to strip the sensationalism away from the Manson case and look at the raw, textbook psychological mechanics he deployed. Manson understood intuitively how to accelerate suggestibility using 3 core clinical components. 1. The weaponization of fractionation. In clinical practice, fractionation is the process of putting a client into trance, bringing them out, and plunging them back in, deeper each time. Manson did this on a grand psychological scale over months. He would make his followers feel intensely loved, suddenly terrifying them with threats of abandonment or violence, and then immediately smooth them back into compliance. This constant high-stakes emotional looping entirely breaks down the conscious mind's capacity for independent reality testing. 2. Acoustic pacing and lead-in overload. Hypnosis requires a cadence. Manson utilized continuous, repetitive acoustic guitar rhythms and monotonous vocal patterns during his sermons. By keeping a steady, unchanging authority baseline while his followers were chemically vulnerable, he seamlessly bypassed their critical thinking filters. His spoken suggestions became fused directly to their internal sensory experience. 3. The erasure of adult ego. Your conscious identity acts as a shield. It is the entity that says, this goes against my morals. By using targeted regression and forced ego death drills under the influence of LSD, Manson systemically uninstalled that protective armor. He didn't just give them a command to commit murder. He entirely cleared the subconscious canvas so that when he spoke, his suggestions encountered absolutely zero internal resistance. Manson was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder under the joint responsibility rule in 1971, spending the rest of his life behind bars. He didn't have to pull a single trigger. or hold a knife at the Tate LaBianca residences. He simply utilized environmental isolation, fractionated trauma, and hypersuggestible trance loops to turn the human subconscious into a lethal weapon. Now, let's clear the air and talk about what actual, ethical clinical hypnosis looks like, because what Manson did wasn't hypnotherapy, it was a weaponized psychological assault. In a normal clinical environment, hypnosis does the exact opposite of identity stripping. Instead of erasing your adult ego or forcing you to die to your boundaries, professional hypnosis works to hand the keys back to you. We use deep relaxation and targeted suggestions to help you quiet the external noise, strengthening your critical thinking filters and tap into your inherent personal resources. A legitimate session builds your agency, aligns your subconscious goals with your conscious morals, and leaves you feeling completely integrated, awake, and in control of your own internal compass. No brainwashing, no isolation, and absolutely no apocalyptic script required. Authentic leadership strengthens your sovereign authority. It never demands that you dismantle it. If you've realized that you're running your life, your career, your business on a script that belongs to someone else, or if you're carrying the silent exhaustion of trying to fit into a mold that actively overrides your gut instinct, it's time to step out of the noise and come back home to your own reality. If you're ready to put down that invisible weight, establish absolute clarity, and lead your life with a sharp, independent, and unburdened mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we'll clear the external programming, stabilize your nervous system in solid reality, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true present authority. Remember, aligned subconscious plus a happy future equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind. Visualize your future. Grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.